Everyone, I'm bringing you another video, and this time I'm putting away the Modern for a little bit, gonna play some Standard. The Pro Tour just happened, it was pretty exciting, very enjoyable to watch, so if you guys didn't watch that, I don't know what else you were doing, but it was pretty sweet. And even if you missed it, but you know what happens, I highly recommend going back and watching some of the stuff, if not everything, but just like maybe cherry picking some of the matches, because there were a lot of good ones between a lot of really good players. So a lot of cool stuff. So basically the format seems like not super open-ended. There were 5-ish decks that did pretty well, and then everything else did kind of poorly. And I think since that's the case, and the metagame at this point is pretty clearly defined, those 5 decks are very clearly at the top, and you're going to see those decks metagaming against each other a lot harder than you did at the Pro Tour. But also I think there are going to be a few other decks that pop up that are generally pretty good against the 5-deck metagame. And that should be interesting, that should be fun to watch. But in the meantime, I'm going to be playing this little Jeskai deck. I have it labeled as Jeskai Burn. That's what makes the most sense to me. I mean, there's 16 burn spells. And like, you know, you treat Mantis Rider and Sarkhan like burn spells. This seems like a burn deck. So I don't know. Like, there's nothing really tempo oriented about this. There's obviously some aggressive elements and whatnot, but for the most part, I just look at this like a burn deck. But you know, feel free to call it whatever you want. So I'm basically playing Yuya's list from the top 8, and it was very interesting that no one went 9-1 or better in standard portion of the Pro Tour. Yuya went 8-2, and he was tied with a bunch of other 8-2s, and then Ben Stark was the sole person that went 8-1-1, and that was it. And a lot of the people had white and red cards, which was pretty interesting. Ben Stark was playing the CFB list with Nullify. Yuya was playing basically this deck, except he had Brimaz instead of Hushwing Griff. And then Dennis Rashid was playing Brad's white-red, all-over-the-place deck. I don't know, Monastery Swissbeard and Elspeth, that type of thing. So, a lot of white-red stuff going on, and I don't know, something like this seems pretty good, so I want to try it. And I wrote about last week basically the 4 different types of Jeskai decks that you could build, and this is kind of an amalgam of them. Overall, I played a little bit with like Strasky's list, because on the surface it seemed the best against the metagame. It had things like Hushwing Griff main deck and Ashcloud Phoenix, just like a lot of flying creatures and less Rabble Masters, so it seemed better against the Abzan decks, and I did pretty well against Abzan. But now I want to try Yuya's deck, and again, like I wrote about in my article, Yuya is basically like the no-nonsense deck builder. Like, he basically always has like the best version of the best deck, and I don't think that's any different in this case. Like, he had Brimaz instead of Hushwing Griff, and I think that's fine. It was just a little tougher on the mana, and I really like the Griff's main deck to kind of hate on the Abzan decks with Siege Rhino and Wingmate Rock. And this is also good against Green Devotion, if that deck still exists. It didn't put up very good numbers at the Pro Tour, but it was pretty popular online always, so I don't know. And then the other major thing that was different about Yuya's deck was no dig through time. He was just a beatdown deck playing all the best cards. But also he had 2 copies of God's Willing, which I think are pretty sweet. It's basically like a 1-mana counter spell, and part of the problem with this deck is that if they just kill all your guys, it's really tough to assemble 20 points of burn. Like, you'll get pretty close, you'll get them down to 5 or whatever, but especially with without something like Dig Through Time, like it's going to be tough to actually like cobble together 20 hard points. So you need your creatures to stick around, you need them to deal some damage, and I think Yuya's God's Willings are pretty good at doing that. So again, just want to try them. Maybe they're going to be slightly worse because I have these Griffs instead of Brimaz. Brimaz is certainly a more high-impact card, something worth protecting, but I also think that in the matchups that the Griff is good, the Griff is also worth protecting. So we're going to see. Other than that, changed his mana base slightly, added or cut a Plains for a Temple of Triumph, and then I just have a random Wooded Foothills instead of the 3rd mountain. And initially my plan was to play more Dig Through Times, in which case I certainly wanted an additional fetch land. However, I only ended up playing 1 because I want to play all this other stuff in the sideboard. So maybe the Foothills is not worth it, but I think it is. But anyway, like, you see people like Sean McLaren playing a lot of Anger of the Gods, a lot of End Hostilities, and I tried that plan, and it was reasonable. But I want to try just like the Suspension Field, your big guy, Disdainful Stroke or Hushwing Griff against your Siege Rhino, and just basically have your sideboard make the things that you were doing in Game 1 better. And also, I should note that I basically don't know how to sideboard with this deck, so you're just going to be following along with me, and I'm going to try and rationalize everything, and it will almost certainly be wrong, but that'll just be an adventure. So, you know, you could side in a bunch of wraths and just like drastically change your game plan, or you could side in some things like Stroke and Suspension Field, which are just naturally good against that deck, and then hope that your plan A is also pretty good. And like I said, I tried the sweepers and they were fine, and now I'm going to try this stuff and see how it goes. Other than that, third copy of God's Willing, and one of the reasons I didn't want the sweepers in the sideboard is because of the God's Willings, because a lot of the time when you bring in sweepers, you want to side out creatures, and then if you're siding out creatures, you want to side out God's Willing. And at that point, it seems like you probably just shouldn't have God's Willing in your deck. So instead, I wanted a sideboard plan that was more conducive to the God's Willing to protect, like my Rabble Master. And Yuya's main deck and sideboard was very cohesive, and it looked like it worked well together, so I'm just going to run with that. And then I have a random erase. It's fine against Green Devotion. Ascendancy combo's a thing, it's there. Maybe this just does not do enough, so it could go, but I wanted some more hedges against things. And then I have a couple Magma Sprays. Yuya had 3. I'd probably be better off cutting a field for a 3rd Magma Spray, but I actually don't own one. And the one bot I went to had a Magma Spray that was not this set. Was that Born of the Gods? Or Journey? I don't know. I kind of like skipped that whole block. But yeah, I didn't want to buy like Shards 1 and just have them be different. It was kind of annoying. So I just kept it the same. But maybe there should be a 3rd spray. It all depends, you know? Something like Anger could also be fine, but again, I like having dudes and not siding in sweepers, because that seems less counterintuitive, you know? And then I have a couple Chandras, and one thing I was realizing with the sweeper sideboard plan is that I wanted to do more of what Brad was doing, where he, like post-board, he had a bunch of Sarkhan, Chandras, and Elspeths, and I think he had 8 Planeswalkers total, and my deck had like 2 Sarkhans and 2 Elspeths. And granted, I had 2 Dig Through times, you know, so I had ways to find them, but it's like, the reason you play a bunch of Elspeths is because the first one probably dies, and then you want to play the second one just immediately. So I found that when I was boarding into the sweeper plan and only had 4 Planeswalkers, it was not enough. It was really tough to actually still stick a threat. I could never get really far ahead, and again, it was tough to just burn them out. So, especially since I was siding out some burn spells in some matchups. So, now I have some Chandras. Hopefully that'll help things. And then I have a Dig Through Time. And plus, if like Control is a thing, Chandra is really good. Elspeth is also, it's like reasonable against Control. It's like a pretty big threat. But I think it's just mainly there to top out in mid-rangey matchups. Like, you play against Abzan, you have 1 Elspeth. If you draw it, it's something you can build to, but it's not something you want to like warp your deck around. And then I have 1 Dig Through Time, again, kind of like the Elspeth, where like games go long, you know, you want some big cards. So that's about it. I'm almost certainly doing things incorrectly, and maybe Yuya would yell at me for changing his pristine deck list. I have no idea, but we are going to find out. So let's get to some matches. How about that?